Mercedes is starting the 2024 season with everyone watching them really closely, and it looks like their new car design will have to prove itself from the very first race day. However, with their driver situation being what it is and with Mercedes having so much work to do to make their car faster, what should we expect from the Silver team on the opening day of Bahrain? And more importantly, have they found what they need to be more steady on the winner's podium, maybe even fighting for race wins against Red Bull and Ferrari? The number one thing that everyone will be watching at Mercedes in Bahrain is how their car looks, something that has so many new ideas that it would take a few races to see if the team got what they wanted during the winter break. For example, the front part that holds the wheels of the W15 has been completely redone and comes with two different test points that are hidden on the car's frame, but the extreme version of the special setup will very likely be left off the car because it felt much worse for both drivers during the last day of testing. This is the day when Mercedes did a few fast low-fuel practice runs, but they still had some room to get better, although their race speed was pretty much the same as Ferrari, suggesting that if everything was equal, they would likely be the better challenger during Sunday's main race. However, the back end of the car was bouncing around a lot, and it's obvious that this is not something that Hamilton would like to drive in his last season with Mercedes, something we should be watching closely in Bahrain. Mercedes has also moved the car's arm more to the bottom side, making the back end much more jumpy when braking and going into corners. This is really important because it proves that the drivers won't have any more excuses in Bahrain. The design seems to be working. They fixed the biggest problem they had with the car being unstable and bouncy, and if the car somehow turns out to be beaten by other teams, then it would make more sense to say that Mercedes competitors just did a better job during the winter break. Talking about the W15's hopes for the season opener, Wolff went on to say, over the first two races in 2024, we will get a much better understanding of the work we have done after practice testing, though we can make some early guesses. The drivers are much happier with how the car feels overall. The basic setup is working like we expected. Our computer predictions seem to be right. This is all good news. It's a solid foundation that we can build on. Our focus during the test was learning about the car we have now. Our attention can turn to making the car faster for the Bahrain weekend. James Allison has also talked about the W15's improvements, and according to the team's technical director, one of the biggest problems with the car has definitely been fixed, which was the terrible snappy back end. Adding to this topic, Allison said, I think that bouncing is still something that's going to be a limit that all the cars will work against until this type of car changes to something different. So there is still some bouncing, but the terrible snappy back end is happily not bothering us like it did before. The results have been achieved mostly based on mechanical changes on the car, but it is always a combination between how the air flows around corners and the car's springs. As I mentioned earlier in this video, Mercedes does have a stable car that Russell and Hamilton have been asking for in the past 2 years, and although it came a bit too late for the 7-time world champion since he won't be driving for the Silver team in 2025, there is still one more season where he could give a real try at being competitive in the F1 field. After all, the changes that have been made in 2024 were mostly about what Hamilton wanted, which brings us to the next point: where will we see the British driver compare against his teammate? From day one, obviously Mercedes has a very hard choice to make, choosing the younger driver over the 7-time world champion, and that could bring a lot of competition from inside the team. But with the car's driver seat being moved 100 millimeters back, and with Hamilton's complaints being heard and put into the car back at their factory, it would be hard to say that he will be the slower driver compared to Russell. Both of them did really well in the practice testing, but in 2023, when the car started to get better, it was Hamilton who had the advantage over Russell, and it wasn't even close. So thinking that his competitive edge will be lost just because he switched teams is definitely something that no one should even consider. However, Mercedes knows that they need to keep everything they can from Hamilton, given the fact that the 2025 cars will look very similar to how they would look in 2024, and every single piece of information needs to be kept away from the older British driver, meaning that in Bahrain we'll see if Mercedes will start to use the favorite driver button on Russell and will build their strategy around him. For them to do this, we'd have to see how they would line up in qualifying for the race. It is very important to note that unlike the other teams, Mercedes did a small number of qualifying practice laps, and they were quite slower than Ferrari and Red Bull in this area as well. So if they start further back on the starting grid, it would be right to guess that they would have to fight hard to reach the podium, which will be a tough thing to do considering the fact that all the cars are very close together and everyone not named Verstappen would be very close to each other. Another very important thing that we should be keeping an eye on is how Russell and Hamilton will handle the W15, especially when it comes to taking a corner. In the past couple of years, we've heard Wolff say that if Mercedes drivers tried to attack the corner like Red Bull did, they would be crashing the car every single time. But now the things that are coming from Russell are quite encouraging. According to the British driver, he feels very confident in attacking the corners much more boldly. And while the top speed is something that needs to be worked on additionally, if these high downforce needs turn out to be quite successful, then Mercedes would be getting a lot more speed in the tracks that are full of these types of corners. Adding to the topic, Russell went on to say, we can attack the medium and high speed corners without the back end snapping out. and we feel like we've made a really good step in terms of how consistent the car is. We can really lean on it better than we've been able to in the past, and this was a huge focus throughout last year. We saw many problems with the W14, which the team has done a really great job to fix. We know that there's a lot more lap time to find. We knew that this would be the case before the test, and Red Bull is looking very strong once again. When it comes to Mercedes, you should always expect the unexpected, and as you already know, the W15 wasn't running at its maximum engine power during the practice testing, showing that the team could very well be saving some performance for the first race in Bahrain. This is something that was also confirmed by Russell, who, after saying that the team got more than enough information that they needed to compare with their computer work over the winter, added that the real deal would be brought in the upcoming race weekend in Bahrain, likely in free practice 3, when all masks come off and all of the teams have to show what they're capable of. And one specific thing that the rest of the teams will be looking at is the front wing of the car, or more precisely whether it's legal. So far, the FIA has labeled this smart design as legal because the third main part is attached to the nose by using a carbon fiber piece, which that goes to bend the rules a little bit and allows for a special airflow trick to be brought back through different methods. The sport believes that this would create a bad trend of trying to bend the rules with creative designs, but if you think about it, it will be a bit unfair if the FIA decides to ban the design just because it's creative and smart. According to Wolff, the team has been in constant talks with the FIA before they even brought the design to the track, because this isn't just something you can bring and hope to the Formula One gods that it will be called legal. But the teams won't rest, and complaints will definitely be made from day one in Bahrain. Overall, Mercedes will have a very difficult job on their shoulders, because apart from the goodbye season that Hamilton will have with the Silver team, there is a massive power fight that will go on between him and Russell. The younger British driver would be put under a huge test, and if Mercedes favors him in the 2024 season starting from Bahrain onwards, then it would make sense for him to outperform and beat his teammate if he was to fill the role of Mercedes' next leader, as Wolff called him to be, from 2025 onwards, if we're to judge by his performance last year, minus the couple of times he didn't finish that weren't his fault. This is going to be a very difficult job, but not an impossible one with all of this in mind. Where do you think Mercedes would end up in Bahrain? And more importantly, do you think sparks will fly between Russell and Hamilton fighting for a better position on the starting grid? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, make sure to click on the video that appears on your screen right now.